There are moments when everything around you feels uncertain, yet something deep within refuses to accept defeat. You may not see the answer yet, and you may not feel the breakthrough yet, but there is a quiet strength rising in your spirit that says this is not the end. Because faith is not moved by what is visible, it is anchored in what is true. And even when circumstances seem unchanged, there is a greater reality working behind the scenes, shaping outcomes, strengthening your inner life, and reminding you that what feels delayed is not denied. Many people spend years trying to change their circumstances without realizing that one of the greatest forces shaping their future is something they use every single day: their words. Words may seem small and ordinary, but they carry tremendous power because they influence thoughts, emotions, beliefs, decisions, and actions continuously. Long before circumstances fully develop outwardly, words are already shaping the inner world of a person. Every day people speak over their lives, often without paying attention to what they are saying. Some speak fear constantly. Nothing ever works for me. I will never get ahead. I'm always struggling. I can't handle this. Others speak hopelessness. My situation will never change. There's no point trying. I'll always feel this way. At first, these may seem like temporary emotional reactions, but repeated words eventually become deeply rooted beliefs. And once beliefs become established, they begin directing behavior, expectations, and emotional responses. Over time, people begin living according to what they have consistently spoken. This is why words are more powerful than circumstances. Circumstances may influence emotions temporarily, but words shape identity and expectation over time. A difficult situation does not automatically destroy a person. What often causes the greatest damage is the negative confession repeated during the struggle. Fearful speech strengthens fearful thinking. Hopeless speech strengthens hopeless expectation. Defeated speech creates defeated behavior. The mind listens to what the mouth repeatedly says. Many people do not realize they are reinforcing their own discouragement daily through constant negative confession. Even when opportunities appear, their words have already trained them to expect failure. They speak limitations so often that possibility begins feeling unrealistic. But the opposite is also true. Faith-filled words strengthen faith-filled thinking. When a person consistently speaks hope, strength, peace, and possibility, their internal atmosphere begins changing. Their thinking becomes more stable. Their emotions become less controlled by fear. Their expectations begin shifting toward growth instead of defeat. Now, this does not mean pretending problems do not exist. Faith-filled speech is not denial of reality. It is choosing not to allow circumstances to become greater than God's promises in your thinking and speaking. A person may still face difficulty while declaring, "God is helping me. This season is temporary. I will not surrender to fear. Strength is rising within me. I believe things can change." Those words matter because they begin reshaping the inner world, and the inner world always influences the outer life eventually. Another important truth is that words affect emotional stability. Negative speech creates heaviness within the mind and body. A person constantly speaking defeat often feels emotionally drained because their words reinforce stress, anxiety, and hopelessness continuously. But faith-filled speech creates a different emotional atmosphere. It strengthens peace. It restores hope. It renews courage. Over time, the entire emotional condition of a person begins shifting because the words they speak daily are changing their internal environment. This is why consistent confession matters so much. One positive statement spoken occasionally may inspire temporary encouragement, but repeated faith-filled confession creates long-term transformation. Day by day, the mind becomes renewed. Day by day, fear weakens. Day by day, expectation rises. Eventually, faith-filled speech becomes natural instead of forced. Another reason words shape the future is because they influence decisions. A person constantly speaking fear will eventually make fear-based decisions. They will avoid opportunities, resist change, and hesitate during important moments because their words have trained them to expect failure. But a person who consistently speaks faith becomes more willing to move forward despite uncertainty. Their words strengthen confidence internally, making courageous action more possible. Words also shape relationships. Negative speech often creates tension, discouragement, and emotional distance. People who constantly complain or speak defeat drain emotional energy from themselves and others. But hopeful speech encourages connection, peace, and strength. Faith-filled words uplift not only the speaker but also the people listening. Another powerful truth is that words shape identity. What a person repeatedly says about themselves eventually becomes how they see themselves. If someone constantly says, "I'm weak, I'm broken, I'm a failure," those statements slowly become internal identity. But if someone consistently declares, "I am growing, I am becoming stronger, God is working in my life, I will overcome," identity begins shifting towards strength and possibility. And once identity changes, behavior begins changing too. Many people wait for circumstances to improve before changing how they speak. But transformation often begins the opposite way. Words begin changing first, then thinking changes, then emotions change, then actions change. Eventually, circumstances begin reflecting that inward transformation. This process requires consistency because years of negative thinking are not reversed overnight. But daily faith-filled confession gradually rewires the inner world. The mind begins expecting peace instead of panic. The heart begins expecting possibility instead of defeat. The spirit becomes stronger and steadier. Over time, even difficult situations feel different because the person walking through them has changed internally. And this is why words matter more than circumstances. Circumstances are temporary and constantly shifting, but words shape the beliefs and expectations that determine how a person responds to those circumstances. A person who masters their speech begins mastering their inner life, and a person who transforms their inner life eventually transforms the direction of their future, because what you consistently speak today is quietly building the life you will experience tomorrow. Faith-filled confession is far more than repeating positive statements. It is the deliberate act of aligning your words with truth instead of fear, with hope instead of defeat, and with God's promises instead of temporary circumstances. Many people underestimate the power of confession because they think words are only expressions of emotion. But words are much more than emotional reactions. They are declarations that shape the atmosphere of the heart, influence the mind, and strengthen or weaken spiritual authority. Every person speaks constantly throughout the day. Some of those words are spoken out loud, while many others are repeated silently within the mind. These repeated words gradually become beliefs, and those beliefs begin directing emotions, decisions, and expectations. This is why confession matters so deeply. What a person repeatedly declares eventually becomes part of how they see themselves and how they experience life. When confession is filled with fear, doubt, and negativity, the inner world becomes weak and unstable. A person constantly saying, "I will never succeed," or "nothing ever changes for me," slowly trains their mind to expect failure. Over time, hopelessness becomes familiar, and fear begins controlling how they respond to life. But faith-filled confession creates a completely different atmosphere internally. When a person consistently declares truth, strength, peace, and victory, something begins changing beneath the surface. The mind becomes calmer, emotional pressure decreases, hope starts rising again, confidence grows stronger. This process may not happen instantly, but repeated faith-filled words gradually renew the entire inner life. One of the greatest effects of faith-filled confession is that it activates confidence. Many people struggle with insecurity because their inner dialogue is constantly negative. They criticize themselves, speak limitation over their future, and repeat fear-based thoughts daily. Eventually, those thoughts shape how they see themselves. They begin believing they are weak, incapable, or stuck permanently. But when confession changes, identity begins changing too. A person who consistently declares, "God is strengthening me. I am not defeated. I will overcome this season. Peace is growing within me," begins creating a new internal belief system. These words strengthen confidence because they align the heart with possibility rather than limitation. Faith-filled confession also produces peace. Fear-filled speech creates tension within the body and mind. Constant negative thinking keeps emotions unsettled and the mind exhausted. But Speaking words of faith calms internal pressure. It shifts attention away from fear and toward trust in God's ability to help and guide. Peace is extremely important because a peaceful heart responds to life differently than an anxious one. A peaceful person thinks more clearly, makes wiser decisions, and recovers more quickly from setbacks. Faith-filled confession helps create that peace by reinforcing hope and stability daily. Another powerful aspect of confession is spiritual authority. Many people live as if they are powerless against fear, discouragement, or negative circumstances. They react emotionally to everything happening around them because they do not realize the authority their words carry. Authority begins when a person refuses to speak in agreement with defeat any longer. Instead of constantly saying, "I can't handle this. This situation will destroy me. Nothing good will happen," they begin declaring, "God is with me. I have strength for this season. I refuse to surrender to fear." This challenge is temporary. Those declarations matter because they strengthen spiritual authority internally. The person is no longer simply reacting to circumstances, they are standing against fear with faith-filled words. Faith-filled confession also renews the mind. Many people have spent years repeating negative thoughts and fearful speech. Those patterns become deeply rooted over time. But repeated confession of truth begins replacing old mental patterns gradually. Day by day, the mind begins changing. Day by day, fear loses influence. Day by day, confidence grows stronger. This process requires consistency. One day, a positive confession may encourage temporarily, but long-term transformation happens through daily repetition. The more truth is spoken, the more natural faith becomes. Another important truth is that confession influences expectation. People naturally expect what they consistently speak. A person constantly speaking defeat begins expecting defeat. But a person consistently declaring hope begins expecting possibility. An expectation affects how life is experienced emotionally. A hopeful person walks differently through challenges than someone expecting failure. They remain steadier because their words have strengthened their expectation internally. Faith-filled confession also helps during waiting seasons. Many people lose hope because they focus entirely on what has not changed yet. Delay causes frustration, and frustration often produces negative speech, but confession keeps the heart aligned with faith even before results appear. A person may still face challenges while declaring, "God is still working. I believe breakthrough is possible. My current condition is not my final destination." Those words sustain endurance during difficult moments. Over time, faith-filled confession becomes more than a practice, it becomes part of identity. A person begins thinking differently, speaking differently, and responding differently because their inner world has been transformed through consistent agreement with truth. Eventually, confidence replaces insecurity, peace replaces fear, authority replaces helplessness. And even before circumstances fully change, the person themselves has changed internally. That is the power of faith-filled confession. It strengthens the heart, renews the mind, activates spiritual authority, and builds a life no longer controlled by fear but guided by faith and expectation. Speaking victory daily is one of the most powerful ways to renew the mind and weaken the influence of fear. Many people do not realize how much their daily speech affects their emotional condition, thought patterns, and overall direction in life. Every day, words are shaping beliefs. They are reinforcing either faith or fear, hope or discouragement, confidence or insecurity. Over time, repeated words become deeply rooted within the heart and begin influencing how a person experiences life. Most people naturally speak according to what they feel. If circumstances are difficult, they speak discouragement. If fear rises, they speak fear. If disappointment comes, they speak defeat. While this may feel normal, constantly speaking negative words creates a dangerous cycle. Fearful words strengthen fearful thinking, and fearful thinking produces even more negative speech. Eventually, a person becomes trapped in an emotional atmosphere shaped by their own repeated confession. This is why speaking victory daily matters so much. When a person intentionally chooses to speak faith, peace, strength, and hope every day, something begins changing internally. The mind slowly becomes renewed. Fear begins losing authority. Emotional pressure weakens, and faith starts growing stronger. This process may seem simple, but it is deeply powerful because the mind listens to what the mouth repeatedly says. Repeated speech eventually becomes internal belief. What a person consistently declares becomes part of how they think, how they feel, and how they expect life to unfold. A person constantly saying, "Nothing will ever improve," "I can't handle this," "I'm always struggling," gradually trains their mind to expect limitation and defeat. But a person who daily declares, "God is strengthening me. This season is temporary. I refuse to surrender to fear. Peace is growing within me," begins building an entirely different internal atmosphere. One of the greatest effects of daily victorious confession is mental renewal. Many people live with minds filled with negativity because they have spent years repeating fear-based thoughts and words. Those patterns become automatic over time. Fearful thinking feels natural because it has been practiced repeatedly. But the mind can be renewed through consistent replacement of negative confession with truth-filled speech. Every time a person chooses faith over fear in their words, they weaken old mental patterns and strengthen new ones. This does not happen overnight. Transformation is gradual, but daily repetition creates lasting change. Day by day, fearful thoughts become weaker. Day by day, peace becomes stronger. Day by day, confidence begins replacing discouragement. Another important truth is that speaking victory daily affects emotional stability. Fear-filled speech creates emotional heaviness. Constant negative confession keeps the nervous system under pressure and the mind focused on problems. But speaking words of faith creates calmness and emotional steadiness. A peaceful confession produces a peaceful atmosphere internally. This matters because fear often gains strength through repetition. The more a person repeats negative thoughts, the stronger fear becomes. But the opposite is also true. The more a person repeats truth, faith grows stronger. This is why consistency matters more than temporary emotion. There will be days when a person does not feel victorious. There will be moments where circumstances remain difficult and emotions feel heavy. But speaking victory during those moments is especially powerful because it trains the heart not to depend entirely on feelings. Faith-filled speech says, "I may feel pressure, but I will not surrender. I may not see change yet, but I still believe. My current situation is not my final outcome." Those declarations strengthen endurance and help the mind remain stable during uncertainty. Speaking victory daily also changes focus. Fear naturally pulls attention toward problems, limitations, and worst-case scenarios. But faith-filled confession redirects focus toward possibility, strength, and God's promises. This shift in focus changes emotional experience dramatically. A person focused only on problems feels overwhelmed. A person focused on possibility begins feeling hopeful again. Another powerful aspect of daily confession is expectation. People eventually expect what they consistently speak. A person constantly declaring defeat begins expecting failure in every situation. But a person consistently speaking victory begins expecting progress, favor, and breakthrough. Expectation influences how a person responds to life. Someone expecting good becomes more resilient during challenges because they believe difficulties are temporary. But someone expecting defeat becomes discouraged quickly because their words have already prepared them for failure emotionally. Speaking victory daily also shapes identity. What a person repeatedly says about themselves eventually becomes how they see themselves. If someone constantly says, "I'm weak," "I'll never recover," "I'm stuck forever," those words become deeply rooted identity. But if someone daily declares, "I am growing stronger, God is helping me, I will overcome this," identity begins shifting towards strength and faith. Over time, the person begins living differently because they no longer see themselves through the lens of fear. Another important truth is that speaking victory does not mean denying reality. It means refusing to allow reality to become greater than God's promises in your thinking and speaking. A person can acknowledge difficulty while still declaring faith and hope. That balance is powerful because it keeps the heart grounded without surrendering to hopelessness. Eventually, consistent victorious confession transforms the inner life completely. Fear loses control. Peace becomes natural. Confidence grows stronger. The mind becomes steadier. And Once the inner world changes, outward life begins changing too, because victory often begins in the unseen realm of thoughts, beliefs, and words, long before it becomes visible externally. Consistency is one of the most overlooked keys to developing strong and unshakable faith. Many people desire powerful faith, but they often underestimate the importance of daily spiritual discipline. They want immediate confidence, instant peace, and quick breakthrough, yet faith is rarely built in a single moment. True faith becomes strong through repeated practice, repeated focus, and repeated agreement with God's promises over time. Just as the body grows stronger through consistent exercise and nourishment, faith also grows stronger through daily spiritual habits. One prayer spoken occasionally cannot produce the same strength as continual prayer. One positive confession spoken once cannot fully renew years of fear-based thinking. Consistency is what creates depth. It is what transforms temporary inspiration into lasting inner strength. Many people experience moments of encouragement during powerful sermons, emotional worship, or motivational messages. For a short time, they feel hopeful and strong. But when challenges return, fear often rises again because their faith was built mostly on emotion rather than consistency. Emotion can inspire temporarily, but consistency produces stability. This is why daily confession, daily prayer, and daily meditation on truth matter so much. Those small, consistent actions may not seem dramatic at first, but over time they create profound transformation. Faith is not usually built through occasional emotional highs. It is built through repeated agreement with truth during ordinary days and difficult seasons alike. Many people quit too early because they expect immediate visible results. They speak faith for a few days, pray consistently for a short period, and when circumstances do not change quickly, they become discouraged. But spiritual growth often happens gradually. The roots of faith are developing beneath the surface long before outward breakthrough becomes visible. A seed does not become a tree overnight. Growth happens quietly and progressively. In the same way, consistency in confession and faith practices slowly develop spiritual strength within the heart. At first, changes may seem small. Fear may still try to rise. Doubt may still appear occasionally. But each day of consistency weakens fear's influence and strengthens faith's foundation. Another important truth is that consistency trains the mind. The human mind naturally follows repeated patterns. Negative thinking becomes strong because it has often been practiced for years. Fearful speech becomes automatic because it has been repeated consistently. But those patterns can be changed through repeated faith-filled confession and focus. Every day a person speaks hope instead of defeat. The mind begins forming new patterns. Every day they choose peace instead of panic. Emotional stability grows. Every day they declare truth instead of fear. Faith becomes more natural. This transformation may not happen instantly, but consistency guarantees progress over time. Consistency also creates emotional endurance. Life contains delays, disappointments, and difficult seasons. Without a strong foundation, people become easily discouraged during pressure. But consistent faith practices build resilience. They create stability that remains even when emotions fluctuate. A person with consistent spiritual habits does not collapse every time circumstances become difficult, because their faith is not dependent entirely on feelings. Their strength has been developed gradually through daily practice. Another powerful aspect of consistency is that it protects against spiritual instability. Many people live emotionally controlled lives because they only focus on faith occasionally. During good seasons, they feel hopeful, but during difficult seasons, they quickly become fearful again. Consistency creates steadiness. A person who daily feeds their spirit with truth becomes less controlled by external circumstances because their inner world is being strengthened continuously. Consistency also shapes identity. What a person repeatedly does becomes part of who they are. Someone who consistently speaks fear begins identifying as weak or hopeless. But someone who consistently practices faith begins identifying with strength, peace, and victory. Eventually, faith becomes more than an occasional response, it becomes a lifestyle. This is important because identity influences behavior. Once a person begins seeing themselves as someone who walks in faith, they respond to challenges differently. They no longer react automatically with panic because their inner life has been trained toward trust and stability. Consistency also deepens confidence in God. Every time a person continues praying, confessing truth, and standing in faith despite difficulties, they strengthen their trust in God's faithfulness. Over time, they begin remembering past moments where God helped them, strengthened them, or carried them through difficult seasons. These memories build stronger expectation for the future. Another important truth is that consistency matters even when emotions are absent. Some days faith-filled confession may feel powerful and encouraging. Other days it may feel dry or difficult. But transformation is not based solely on emotional intensity. It is based on continued agreement with truth regardless of feelings. A person who remains consistent during emotionally difficult seasons develops deeper faith than someone who only practices faith when they feel inspired. Over time, consistency creates unshakable faith because it builds roots deep beneath the surface. Temporary emotions may rise and fall, but deeply rooted faith remains stable. Fear may still attempt to appear, but it no longer dominates the heart the same way. Eventually, peace becomes stronger than anxiety. Hope becomes stronger than discouragement. Confidence becomes stronger than doubt. And this transformation happens not through one dramatic moment alone, but through daily consistency practiced faithfully over time. Because small acts of faith repeated consistently are what build a life that remains steady even during the storms of life. Authority is one of the most misunderstood aspects of faith because many people live with a mindset of limitation rather than a mindset of spiritual responsibility and confidence. They often see themselves as victims of circumstances, as people who must simply endure whatever life brings. But faith reveals a different reality, one where believers are not powerless, but are given authority in their thoughts, words, and spiritual standing too. Resist fear, overcome challenges, and stand firm in truth. Spiritual authority begins internally before it is ever expressed externally. It starts with identity. A person who does not understand who they are will always struggle to exercise authority. If someone sees themselves as weak, defeated, or helpless, their words will reflect that belief, and their actions will follow it. But when a person begins to understand their position in faith rooted in truth and promise, they begin to speak and act differently. Many people live reactively instead of authoritatively. They react to fear, react to symptoms, react to negative news, and react to pressure. Their emotional world is constantly responding to what happens around them. But authority shifts that dynamic. Instead of reacting, a person begins responding from a place of confidence and stability. They are no longer dictated by circumstances, they are anchored in something deeper. One of the clearest expressions of authority is in speech. Words reveal whether a person is living from fear or from faith. A fearful voice says, "I cannot handle this," or "This situation is too much for me." But an authoritative, faith-filled voice says, "I will not be overcome," or "This situation will not define my future." The difference is not arrogance, it is confidence rooted in truth. Authority also means refusing to agree with fear. Fear constantly tries to speak into the mind, offering worst-case scenarios and creating emotional pressure. But authority refuses agreement with those thoughts. Instead, it replaces fear-based thinking with truth-based confession. This is where transformation begins. When agreement shifts, direction begins to shift. Many people unknowingly give authority to fear by constantly repeating what fear suggests. The more fear is spoken, the more powerful it feels internally. But when faith is spoken consistently, fear begins losing its influence. Authority is not about denying reality, it is about refusing to give fear the final voice. Another important aspect of authority is mental discipline. A person walking in authority learns to guard their thoughts. They do not allow every negative idea to take root. Instead, they evaluate thoughts through the lens of truth and choose what to accept and what to reject. This mental discipline strengthens emotional stability because the mind is no longer a battleground of uncontrolled fear. Authority also influences emotional response. A person without authority becomes easily overwhelmed by challenges. But a person walking in authority remains steadier during pressure because they understand that circumstances are not final. They may still feel emotions, but emotions no longer dictate their decisions or declarations. This is why confession is so important in authority. Speaking truth consistently reinforces internal strength. When a person declares, "I am not defeated" or "I will overcome," they are not merely repeating words, they are reinforcing identity and resisting fear at the same time. Over time, these declarations build inner confidence that changes how a person carries themselves in life. Authority also requires consistency. It is not something activated once and forgotten. It is strengthened daily through repeated alignment with truth. Every time a person chooses faith over fear in their speech and thinking, their sense of authority grows stronger. Every time they resist negative agreement, they reinforce spiritual stability. Many people lose their sense of authority because they allow circumstances to define their mindset. When situations become difficult, they assume they are powerless, but authority says otherwise. Authority says that current conditions are temporary and do not determine final outcomes. Authority refuses to surrender mentally or emotionally to fear. Another important truth is that authority brings peace. A person who understands their spiritual position is less likely to be shaken by external events. This does not mean problems disappear instantly, but it means problems no longer control the inner world. Peace begins to dominate even in the presence of difficulty. Authority also strengthens perseverance. When a person believes they have no control, they give up quickly. But when they understand they can stand firm in truth, they endure longer. They remain steady during waiting seasons because they believe change is still possible. Over time, authority transforms identity. A person no longer sees themselves as helpless or defeated. They begin to see themselves as someone who can stand, resist fear, and walk in confidence rooted in truth. This shift changes how they speak, how they think, and how they respond to life. Ultimately, spiritual authority is not about controlling external circumstances. It is about refusing to be controlled internally by fear, doubt, or negativity. It is about standing firm in truth regardless of what is happening around you. And when authority becomes consistent in speech, thought, and belief, fear loses its grip, confidence rises, and a person begins walking with a steadiness that reflects inner strength and faith-driven victory. The mind is one of the most powerful arenas where victory or defeat is first decided. Long before a person experiences breakthrough or struggle outwardly, the battle has already taken place internally in their thoughts. This is why renewing the mind is not optional in a life of faith. It is essential. A renewed mind becomes the foundation for peace, stability, and spiritual strength, while an unrenewed mind remains vulnerable to fear, doubt, and confusion. Most people are shaped by repeated thoughts over time. Whatever is consistently allowed into the mind begins forming patterns of belief. If the mind is constantly exposed to fear, negativity, and limitation, those patterns become deeply rooted. Eventually, the person begins to interpret life through those patterns automatically. Even neutral situations begin to feel negative because the mind has been trained to expect difficulty. Renewing the mind begins with awareness. A person must first recognize that not every thought they think is truth. Thoughts can come from fear, past experiences, emotional wounds, or external influences. If every thought is accepted without question, the mind becomes crowded with confusion. But when a person begins to evaluate thoughts through truth, a transformation begins. Renewing the mind is not about suppressing thoughts, it is about replacing them. Negative thinking cannot simply be removed, it must be replaced with truth-filled thinking. When fear says you are not going to make it, truth responds, I will not be overcome. When doubt says nothing will change, truth responds, change is still possible. This process requires consistency because mental patterns are formed over time. Just as negative thinking develops through repetition, renewed thinking also develops through repetition. The more a person intentionally focuses on truth, the more natural that truth becomes in their thinking process. One of the greatest challenges in renewing the mind is emotional resistance. Feelings often try to reinforce old patterns. If a person has experienced repeated disappointment, their emotions may resist hope. If they have faced long seasons of difficulty, their mind may naturally expect more of the same. But renewing the mind means choosing truth even when emotions resist it. This is where discipline becomes important. A renewed mind is not controlled by emotional fluctuation. It is guided by truth, even when feelings have not yet caught up. Over time, as truth is consistently applied, emotions begin to align with renewed thinking. Peace replaces anxiety, confidence replaces fear, stability replaces confusion. Another important aspect of renewing the mind is focus. What a person consistently focuses on becomes magnified in their experience. If focus remains on problems, problems feel larger. If focus shifts toward truth, possibilities become clearer. This does not mean ignoring reality, but it means choosing what receives the greatest attention. Many people unintentionally strengthen fear by repeatedly thinking about what could go wrong. They rehearse negative outcomes in their minds, which increases emotional pressure. But renewing the mind involves breaking that cycle and intentionally redirecting focus toward truth, hope, and stability. Prayer also plays a major role in renewing the mind. Prayer creates space for inner quietness where thoughts can be realigned. In moments of prayer, the mind is less influenced by external noise and more open to truth and peace. Over time, this consistent alignment strengthens mental clarity. Another powerful truth is that the renewed mind becomes more resistant to fear. Fear still attempts to influence thoughts, but it no longer dominates them. Instead of automatically accepting fear-based thinking, a renewed mind questions it and replaces it with truth. This creates emotional stability even in uncertain situations. Renewing the mind also influences decision-making. A confused mind makes unstable decisions, but a renewed mind thinks more clearly, weighs situations more wisely, and responds with greater confidence. This leads to better outcomes over time because decisions are no longer driven by panic or pressure. As the mind continues to be renewed, identity begins to shift. A person no longer sees themselves through the lens of past failures or limitations. Instead, they begin to see themselves through the lens of truth and possibility. This shift in identity is powerful because it changes how a person carries themselves in daily life. Another important truth is that renewal is continuous, not a one-time event. The mind must be consistently guarded and renewed because life constantly presents new challenges and influences. Without ongoing renewal, old patterns can return. But with consistent practice, renewed thinking becomes the dominant mindset. Over time, a renewed mind produces peace, not because circumstances are perfect, but because internal alignment has changed. Fear loses authority, doubt loses strength, confusion loses control. Peace becomes the natural state of thinking. Ultimately, renewing the mind transforms the entire inner world of a person. It changes how they interpret life, how they respond to challenges, and how they experience emotions. And when the mind is consistently renewed with truth, it becomes a strong foundation for faith, stability, and lasting inner victory. Expectation is one of the most powerful internal forces shaping how a person experiences life, even though many people are not fully aware of its influence. What a person consistently expects becomes the lens through which they interpret every situation. It affects emotions, decisions, reactions, and even long-term direction. Whether consciously or unconsciously, expectation is always active, shaping how life feels from the inside. A person who expects failure begins to prepare internally for disappointment even before anything happens. Their mind becomes conditioned to look for signs of difficulty, delay, or loss. Even neutral events can be interpreted negatively because expectation has already set a pattern of thinking. This kind of expectation creates emotional tension, anxiety, and hesitation in daily life. On the other hand, a person who expects good begins to interpret situations differently. They are not necessarily living in denial of challenges, but their mindset is oriented toward possibility rather than limitation. Even in difficult seasons, they remain open to change, growth, and unexpected favor. This internal expectation creates emotional strength and stability. Expectation also directly influences emotional energy. When a person wakes up expecting failure, their mind begins the day already burdened. They mentally prepare for problems before they even arise. But when a person wakes up expecting peace, guidance, and progress, their emotional starting point is completely different. The day begins with a lighter internal atmosphere because expectation has already shaped their mindset. This is why expectation is so powerful. It sets the tone of the heart before external events even unfold. One of the most important truths about expectation is that it influences perception. Two people can go through the same situation but experience it completely differently based on what they expect. One person sees only obstacles, while another sees lessons or opportunities. One becomes discouraged, while the other becomes reflective and hopeful. The difference is not only in circumstances, but in expectation. Expectation also plays a major role in perseverance. Life includes delays, unanswered questions, and seasons where progress is not immediately visible. During those times, expectation determines whether a person continues or gives up. A low expectation mindset interprets delay as permanent failure, but a faith-filled expectation sees delay as part of a process still unfolding. Many people lose hope, not because nothing is happening, but because their expectation weakens during waiting. They assume silence means absence. They assume delay means denial. But expectation rooted in faith understands that unseen progress can still be happening even when visible results are not yet present. Expectation also shapes speech. People naturally speak in alignment with what they expect internally. A person expecting failure often speaks defeat, limitation, and discouragement. But a person expecting progress begins speaking hope, strength, and possibility. These spoken expectations reinforce internal beliefs and gradually shape behavior. Over time, expectation becomes a cycle. What a person expects influences what they notice. What they notice influences what they believe. What they believe influences how they act, and how they act influences their results. This cycle can either build strength or reinforce limitation depending on the direction of expectation. Faith-filled expectation does not deny reality. It acknowledges present circumstances but refuses to accept them as final conclusions. It allows a person to say, "This is where I am now, but this is not where I will remain." That mindset creates resilience and emotional stability even during uncertain seasons. Expectation also strengthens emotional resilience. People with low expectation become easily discouraged because every setback feels like confirmation of failure. But people with strong expectation of good are more resilient. They recover faster emotionally because their internal belief system is not easily destroyed by temporary difficulty. Another powerful aspect of expectation is awareness. A person who expects nothing good often overlooks opportunities even when they appear. Their mind filters out possibility, but a person with positive expectation becomes more alert. They begin noticing doors, ideas, and moments of favor that others may miss entirely. Expectation also prepares the heart for outcomes. A person living in constant expectation of failure is often emotionally unprepared when something good happens. They may even struggle to receive it. But a person who lives with faith-filled expectation becomes mentally and emotionally ready to accept and sustain positive change. Over time, expectation shapes identity. A person who constantly expects failure begins identifying with limitation. But a person who consistently expects growth, favor, and progress begins identifying with strength and possibility. This identity then influences long-term behavior and direction in life. Ultimately, expectation determines how life is experienced internally. It does not guarantee instant change, but it deeply influences interpretation, emotional response, and daily mindset. Life feels very different depending on whether expectation is rooted in fear or faith. And when expectation is aligned with faith, a person begins to walk with quiet confidence even in uncertainty. They may not have all the answers, but they carry the inner assurance that their future is not defined by present circumstances and that change is still possible even when it has not yet appeared. And if these words stirred something in your heart today, don't let it end here, because what you are hearing is more than motivation. It is a reminder that your story is still unfolding. Keep speaking life when everything around you tries to pull you into fear. Keep standing in faith even when answers are slow. And most importantly, refuse to let temporary circumstances define your permanent future. If you want more messages like this to strengthen your mind, renew your faith, and keep you moving forward, stay connected, because your breakthrough often begins the moment you choose to believe again.